I had just read Dazai's Shayo, The Setting Sun, and Toyoko thought that very appropriate, as it described what had happened to families like hers. But I don't mind. It's democratic, and we actually have more freedom this way, she said. I also mentioned that I liked pottery, especially the rough-looking kind, and that I had visited some kilns. That too touched a string. Man-san, her task accomplished, was watching us happily. After lunch, the three of us took a walk through Gion. We had tea at the Nikenjaya, the picturesque Edo period tea house next to the Gion Jinja. I told Toyoko that I had almost moved to Gion. Oh, how exciting! Why didn't you? I used to play with geishas when I was a child, together with my father. That night I took a room at the Shokaro, under the same roof as Toyoko, who shared a room there with Man-san. I had a restless night, unsure of anything. Over breakfast, Man-san said that Toyoko would like to see how I lived. And I agreed to take the two of them to my house in Nigawa, Nishinomiya, an hour and a half by train. It was a warm autumn day, and we tried to keep our conversation going over the clamor through the train's open windows as it hurtled through the narrow canyon of houses built within meters of the tracks. "Do you have space enough for 1,000 books?" Toyoko shouted. "It's what's left of my father's library." She was leaning over laughing, struggling with her hair. I looked at her in excitement, in amazement, and at that instant the penny dropped. I think it was her sureness of instinct, the absence of doubt in such a vital matter, that swung me. This woman has spunk. I laughed back. "I think so. In the corridor." That settled, I pointed out the hills near my town. The train banked through a curve, and Toyoko grabbed my arm for support. I flexed my banker's biceps in acknowledgement. Our engagement in December 1958 was reported in the Japan Times. And after that, I traveled to Nagoya and spent New Year's Day together with her mother and other family and Man-san. On February 27, 1959, 4 months after our Mihai, we got married at the Dutch Consulate General in Kobe, followed by a rather grand reception at the Kobe Oriental Hotel. Our wedding attracted some attention in the English language newspapers. After our honeymoon in Kyushu, we traveled to Nagoya for a formal wedding dinner with Toyoko's Nagoya family and friends. Meanwhile, my stressful working environment further aggravated my stomach problems. I finally consulted a specialist who diagnosed the early stage of stomach ulcer and a general rundown condition, the result of years of bachelor's neglect. He ordered a month's holiday away from that bank, medication, and a strict and very bland diet. With luck and perseverance, surgery could be avoided. I did what I could to forget that bank for a while. With Toyoko, I took up pottery making, and we visited kilns in Tamba and Amagasaki and Kyoto. One of the potters we visited was Kato Sho, whose kiln was in the grounds of my favorite Tofukuji in Higashiyama-ku. We liked his work and bought 2 of his rustic tea bowls. We met several times, and years later, in 1972, we organized an exhibition of his work in our Tokyo apartment, which was attended by over 20 friends. All Kato's work on display was sold on the spot. Most of my month's rest was spent writing. Toyoko and I also worked on a translation of a story by Satomi Ton, Urenuko, which was eventually published in the Dutch literary magazine Tirade. Among our Japanese friends was a young man, Abe Tsunehiko, who worked for Japan National Railways. He was about to get married and asked us to be their formal go-betweens at their wedding ceremony, which was to take place at the Nanzenji Temple in Kyoto in April 1961. We agreed, and the event was reported in the Mainichi Daily News. After leaving Japan in 1974, Toyoko and I lived in 5 other countries before returning to Japan in 2003. We had a rich life together, thanks in no small part to her creative and inquiring mind, sense of humor, and keen interest in the world around her. Sadly, she passed away in Tokyo in 2007, 48 years after our memorable Omiya in Kyoto. I had quit banking in 1989 after a 7-year stint in New York, taking up writing at long last as my new career. Over the years, I published 6 books and numerous essays and gave lectures in various countries and various cities in Japan. 3 of the books and many essays were also published in Japanese in excellent translations by Hiromi. Hiromi's translations of my essays and short stories have been published regularly in Atlas, a Japanese literary magazine based in Kanda, Tokyo, including 2 stories from my book, The Tomb in the Kyoto Hills, which is here, which won a literary award in 2016. The first of the stories published in Atlas is called Pets in Marriage, appeared in 2017 in Atlas, and the second, Twice Upon a Plum Tree, appeared just now. That one just came out last week. As you see, after all those years, part of me is still tied to Kyoto, in a way. I've always admired its citizens' awareness of the fundamental place that Kyoto holds in Japan's history. Even though Tokugawa Ieyasu robbed Kyoto of its status as the country's capital by setting up his power base in Edo and making that Japan's de facto capital, he at least had the decency or shrewdness to allow Kyoto to maintain its status as the country's imperial capital, with the powerless emperor and his court ensconced there for the next 265 years. Perhaps that accounts for the city's quiet dignity, the quality that inspired me back in 1958 to write that letter to Kyoto. And that, dear audience, with that I conclude my talk about Kyoto in the 1950s. Thank you for your attention. Well, if there are any comments or questions, you're welcome.
Quick question from me.
Yes.
That shakuhachi player, are we going to suggest that's Gary Snyder?
Has he?
Was that shakuhachi player? Was that Gary Snyder? Was that somebody studying at Daitokuji?
You mentioned the shakuhachi.
Yes, yes, yes.
But do you know his name? Do you know?
No, I forgot.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Some of these things I did not record, and I don't remember.
It's a good possibility.
Yeah.
It would help you about 80s.
Yeah.
No, that was the period he was
There
studying.
were a few shakuhachi people around.
Yeah.
Preston mentions one of them. Yeah.
He was also a monk at a temple.
Yes.
Was that, would that fit there?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Who?
Gary is not known as a shakuhachi.
Oh, he's not. Okay.
What happened to the Dutch restaurant that you founded?
I'm afraid it didn't last very long. Only about, about 2 years or so. But there were not enough customers. Also the location, after all, were not so good. It was just a bit off the way, you know, and along that very narrow road along Takasegawa there was a little bridge. We thought it was okay, but it turned out to be sort of backwater.
Yeah.
And I think that was one reason. Another reason is that that name, this Mekorano Suzume, was an absolute misfit, but that was the worst choice we made. Although we thought it was humorous, but that's not what people look for when they want to eat well. People look for good food, you know? So, even though in Dutch it's a weird word, blinde vinker, we still have that in Holland. I don't know why we ever mentioned that, because it's rolled, it's really minced meat rolled in, I don't know, it didn't succeed really, no, sorry to say. Yeah.
In the late 50s, you would go to Kyoto from Nishinomiya, spend a day. Would you see, how many non-Japanese people might you see, Western people might you see? Would it be none? Would it be one or two? What sort of numbers of non-Japanese would be?
Where?
At the time
in Kyoto?
Yeah, when you would wander around Kyoto, would you see nobody?
No, hardly ever saw any foreigners.
Because when you hear your anecdotes, you say there was a Caucasian guy sitting there, and it makes it sound like there were quite a few, but they weren't.
No, hardly any that I recall. There was this Buddhist monk who was an American. I have a hard time remembering it, and that Paul Reps, but he was just visiting, really. He didn't live, well, he spent some time here, but then he left again. You know, tourism was not developed yet in those days. Now this is a city that's suffering from over-tourism. The new words in the dictionary, I think, over-tourism. Amsterdam and Kyoto. We just covered that in our, we have a website, every 2 months we update it, and the latest one was partly devoted to over-tourism, Kyoto being part of it. One of them, maybe the major city that is far too many tourists. Well, in those days, there were hardly any tourists. And foreigners living here, I really don't remember.
Well, you did mention Edward Seidensticker.
Yes.
I went to a talk by him in Tokyo, where he was extremely rude about Kyoto. He said the worst people in the whole of Japan can't stand the place.
He said?
Yeah, but he was being provocative. But
he was always a bit.
Did you get any feeling of that while he was here? I think he was referring to the reputation for Kyoto people being stuck up and cold and conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I could have come up with a few stories about, you know, people that rejected Kyoto. Even in, I think, think Feldhaus, who was my manager at the bank in Osaka, whose picture briefly was shown there, he, after I got married, just, you know, in the days when I got married in 1959, it was very rare for foreign residents working for foreign banks or foreign companies in Japan to get married to a local woman. Often they didn't live here long enough anyhow, or it was being discouraged, or you know, it might complicate their life elsewhere later, etc., etc. My bank too, they said, you know, don't get involved too much, not only with the language, but also not with women. Okay, get your point. And therefore it was questionable whether I would get approval of the bank. And I mean, they didn't have to approve, but if they could say, well, we don't accept that, then I would have to resign.
Oh.
No, they accepted it. And then turned out, within months after I had, my manager also married a Japanese. Someone we had always kept on the sly, so to speak. Nobody knew that he had a lady friend. And she was from a Kyoto family, but I think only the father was from Kyoto, and the mother was from outside, another city, I can't remember. And she suffered in Kyoto because she was always discriminated by the locals in Kyoto because she didn't have the right accent, her cooking was not right, and you know, there were these kind of, there was a difference there, yeah.
This is not specifically Kyoto, but my guarantor used to be a banker in Kobe in the 50s as well for Standard Chartered, the Japanese guy Naito-san. You didn't happen to know him, Naito?
Naito?
Yeah, he worked for Standard Chartered in Kobe at that time, no? He worked for Standard Chartered Bank in Kobe.
Oh, Standard Chartered.
At the same time. So did you have much to do with the other banks there?
Well, I don't know how long ago that was.
No, 50s, yeah.
In the 50s? Well, I worked in Kobe. I mean, the last 10 years of my stay in Japan, so from 62 until 74, when I left Japan, I lived in Tokyo, and I was head of Japan for the bank. The bank had, meanwhile, been taken over by an American bank, by the way, in 1964 already.
Which one?
After Indonesia became independent, my bank, National Handelsbank, was taken over by the Continental Illinois Bank of Chicago. And they kept me on as the boss because they didn't have anyone with any international experience anyway, but so that helped. And I stayed until I left in 74. But yeah, I might have known some, but you know, these are casual acquaintances at a cocktail party or so. You know, say, hi, how are you? We exchange mails, you forget about each other again.
One more small thing about Kobe. Kitano-cho, were there quite a few foreigners still living in houses? Or were there still some old wealthy families living in Kitano-cho in Kobe?
Were you in Kitano-cho?
Yeah. Like you took a room in an apartment there. But
Yeah.
were there still some leftover very wealthy foreign families there from much
not
earlier?
anymore.
No?
No.
Okay.
It was, no, that period had foreign, well, there were some old established families, yes. For instance, Morozov. In fact, since you asked me, Morozov was originally Russian. They moved to maybe when 1917, the Russian Revolution. I think many people left Russia, and this family moved to Japan, and they settled in Kobe, and they started a bakery and a chocolate factory and that sort of thing. And that name is still there, Morozov. And when I was a young man, there in my early 20s, I dated a girl from that family. Her name was Morozov, her last name. And I was a member of the Shoya Country Club by that time, which was located in Shoya, west of Kobe. And one night I invited her out to have dinner at the Shoya Country Club. And I reserved a table. And when I came into the dining room, all I could see was one huge table, lots of people sitting around it, and only 2 or 3 empty chairs. So I thought, this is actually a group dinner tonight. So I moved with my girl to the table, and then at the head of the table, suddenly a voice said, "Brinckmann, not at this table." And that was my boss from the bank. He was giving a large dinner party there. And I thought, but I reserved a table here. So I looked around, and in the corner was one more table, only one other table, set for 2, no one else. One huge table with about 20 people around it, and one table. It never really, you know, that evening was, it didn't have its intended purpose, and I'm afraid I never saw the girl again.
Question. So, how do you feel when you come back to Kyoto now and see Kyoto in 2000?
It's so different, but I haven't really, well, we've been back many times since then, that's true. But this time, just arrived yesterday and just looked around the hotel today, this morning. Well, there have been nice moments. For instance, well, some of the stories in the tomb in the Kyoto Hills set in Kyoto, and they are based on, although it's fiction, they're all based on real experiences to a considerable extent. And those experiences are not quite from the 1950s, I don't think. They're mostly more, well,